But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 322. Why shouldn't women vote? Women explain. I'm Hannah Wallen here with the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and nonsense annihilator Lauren Brooks, and we are getting to the rat killing because that's just one more thing badgers do. But before we get into that, we got to do what we got to do. But before we get into what we got to do, just gonna point out ahead of time that we're gonna be jumping around between some pages. So the piece of writing that is included in the report that we've been reading is behind a paywall in the New York Times. It's it was published originally in the New York Times. It is public domain, and I can get it from Amazon. I can get it on Kindle, but I don't have Kindle app on this computer at this time. And it's 7 pages long, and I don't think we need all 7 pages, so I'm not going to worry about it. There's a few things we'll talk about from what she had to say, and then we'll get on with the rest of the report, because the gist of this is pretty I think pretty easy to figure out. But in the meantime, let me make sure. Okay, it just looked for a minute on OBS like my sound wasn't working, but it was just frozen, I guess. I don't know. If there is a problem, I'll see it in the chat, right? Just make something up, says Mangaka. Mangaka92. Actually, he probably could make something up, and it would be better than the logic for women voting. But there you go. And that logic was kind of made up anyway. But let's get into the thing we gotta do before we do what we gotta do, if that makes sense. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justatip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that out of the way, oatmeal boxes and strings, says Richard Bier. I think sometimes that might work better than social media, honestly. At least you don't get shadow banned on oatmeal boxes and string. So there you go. But to the rat killing. So the things that have been discussed to date in regard to women against women's suffrage, we pointed out that for the majority of the time that the suffragettes were pushing for women's suffrage, anti-suffragettes outnumbered them. We've pointed out that women had a great deal of power in society before women had voting rights. And this was I should say before women had universally achieved voting rights, because women had voting rights in some states, and women in the UK had voting rights prior to the changes in, I believe, 1830. Actually, even after the changes in 1830, it was really prior to, I want to say, there was another reform after that. But yeah, even women in the UK had voting rights when the suffragettes said women's voting rights were taken away. Mostly women didn't, mostly men didn't. You had to have a certain level of property or taxpayer status. But yeah, they did have some. And you also saw achievements like the women's Christian temperance movement getting alcohol outlawed, not just by law, but by U.S. Constitution. They actually got a constitutional amendment passed. And they used the allegation that men come home drunk and beat their wives to get it done. So clearly, women were not without power, and they were not without influence, right? So that's part of the argument, actually, that Mrs. Arthur M. Dodge makes. And I'll, just to show you really quick here, this is the article, the front page of the article that we're looking at. Case Against Votes for Women, Mrs. Arthur M. Dodge gives reasons why the ballot should not be granted to women. And just a reminder, these women were asking for a level of legal power in a time where they exercised legal power in their husbands' names already. So they wanted to keep that, but they also wanted to exercise legal power in their own names in addition to that. So
And I have to wonder how many of them who have been since lost to history, how many of them were saying, yeah, not only should women not have the vote, men should not have the vote. It's hard to imagine from this stage in advanced whatever this is, the idea that no one should have the vote, because democracy is the thing we should be saving, right? Democracy is the be all and end all, right? Because if you don't have democracy, you don't have anything. And this has become so drilled into us that we're like, yeah, of course. There's no other alternative. Throughout history, people have always had democracy. Democracy has always presided over the technological advances of the past. I am, of course, being sarcastic. It has not.
It's amazing how many people don't realize that, though.
It's
today.
a reasonably recent invention. It's an invention of the post-Christian West.
Well, at least
I think I'm going to go
under,
ahead and call it.
in the English common law governed states, countries. Because
Yeah, and
Greece
we
invented democracy, but that's a whole different story.
it was a whole different process.
Yeah.
And if we want to go back to the process that the Greeks did, in terms of philosopher kings, then we could maybe go back to that. But it doesn't resemble what we have
right
nowadays. It's any Tom, Dick, and Harry who can be hoodwinked by the government, who has a say in these things.
And then you end up getting governed by Tom's Harry Dick.
Yes. And we've discovered this whole different world ever since Trump went down the escalator, because Trump was already rich. This was very unusual for a politician. Most politicians are lawyers who went into it because they weren't satisfied with how much money they were making as lawyers. So they went into politics so that they could earn even more money by stealing it from the people of the country they're supposed to be serving. And it's the idea that someone like Trump could be president is horrifying to these people, because Trump was already rich. He doesn't need to be bought off. He's not interested in someone paying him $1 million to make this particular decision, because he's like, I've already got $1 billion. What the fuck are you talking about? Get here for. And this is largely why these fucking communists can't stand the idea of someone who's already independently wealthy leading a country. And that sort of goes to show you, well, it sort of goes to remind you that for the longest time, countries were ruled by kings who were not financially incentivized. Well, to some degree they were, but to some degree, to the most important degree, they were taught from an early age how to rule over a people. And yeah, on the surface that sounds tyrannical, but it was certainly no less tyrannical than democratic government is nowadays. As we've only seen in the past few decades, it was going all right for a while, just like monarchy was going all right for a while. and I mean a while. It's just like empires. Empires generally go all right for a while before they collapse. In much to say, we're seeing our empire collapse. In fact, there seems to be a middle ground between tribal warfare and the tyranny of empires. And it seems to be monarchy. It seems to be you just put one very posh guy who's been trained his whole life in charge of the country. He's rich enough that he can't be bought off by lobbies of any sort. And his only duty is to his people. And yeah, sometimes you'll get a tyrannical king. Sometimes you'll get a King John. Sometimes you'll get an absolute bastard. And sometimes you'll get a benign king who actually, because he has no need for any more money than he has, he'll just be like, yeah, my job is to improve and maintain the lives and happiness of my subjects, for want of a better word. But that's basically, it's the people with whom I'm charged with protecting and maintaining, and that's when it's someone who's already rich. You'll find you're more likely to find yourself in a better position than someone who's only in that position in order to get rich, and that is the difference between democracy and monarchy. And I'm not saying monarchy is the answer to everything either, but we've found ourselves at this point in history where we're being told that democracy is the only possible way, and it's not.
Well,
Monarchy has worked quite well for quite a long time, and you may say, yeah, but society has changed. But maybe society has changed because the ruling party has changed. And yeah, sorry, go on.
I was gonna say there's some to that, and then there's some ick to it too, and the thing that makes it ick is the history of humanity following people that are good leaders, and then assuming that people who sound like them or came from them are also going to be good leaders. So you end up in a situation where you had a great leader through meritocracy, strength, the ability basically to get people to follow your lead because what you're doing is wise and benevolent, beneficial, right, whatever. And then slowly over time you have this decay that takes place where more and more of the people who follow, whether it's sons and daughters, whether it's people on the same type of platform, the same political party, whatever, end up not really being the same, and then being more than a little different, and then being extremely different, and finally, it's why the hell are we supporting these people or tolerating these people? And human history is a history of following strong leaders and then following their children or their disciples, and then getting fed up with the shit that comes from decay and tearing down the system. And sometimes tearing down the system looks like a peaceful removal of weak leaders, but most of the time in human history, it looks like civil war and the brutal murder of said leaders. And humans haven't learned, right? For centuries, leadership hasn't learned. Because they end up being, instead of leadership, they end up being authorities. And there's a huge difference between leadership and authority. You need some level of authority in order to be a good leader. But if you think of yourself strictly in terms of authority, you end up, instead of leading, you end up dominating. And that's what we've had here in the U.S. It's just been on fast forward. And the thing that put it on fast forward is honestly the gimme mentality that came out of women's suffrage. And we're going to get into that in this article. I don't think that there's a good form of government. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is not a good form of leadership. But there is no good way for individual citizens to sit back on their haunches and just trust somebody else to make all their decisions and be sure that that individual is going to be benevolent and wise and always exercise their power in a way that benefits as many of the people as possible, as much of the time as possible, without harming other people in the process. I just don't see it, right? You look at the problems that we have today, that our political discussion exists to address today, particularly the things the men's rights movement exists to address. They're pretty much all either caused or exacerbated to the point where they become a societal problem instead of something that happens sometimes to people that shouldn't, because of government. Right? Everything ends up, all these problems end up flowing from or growing from government. I don't have a way to... Let me see if I can... Richard Beer is asking me to boost my microphone gain, so let me... The most I can do is turn it all the way up in OBS. I don't think it's turned down on my... I have a little thing here. No, it's not turned down on the microphone.
Did you just do the pawn shop, the best I can do meme?
Yes. Yes. The best I can do is this tiny little bit. And there it goes. See, when I do this, every time I get to ranting about something, I see spikes in there where I'll be going along and it's I'm always in the green or the yellow in the graphic that shows how loud we are and everything, right? Except every so often it spikes into the red for a second, and I'm thinking that's a plosive. Plosives are your P's, your T's, sometimes your S's are really bad. You guys are all lucky I work really hard not to lisp. I have some very good reasons to have a bad lisp.
A lisp is not plosive, a lisp is fricative.
It's fricative?
Are fricative, P's and B's.
Well, I do feel rather fricative over it, so...
It just sounds like a dirty word, doesn't it?
But yes, it does. It's kind of like, botulism and Shih Tzu. This is how I taught my kids to cuss when they were little. Don't say bitch, say botulism.
It's like nooks and crannies. Every time I hear that, I think it sounds like two different racial slurs, but I'm not quite sure.
Well, and then in my family, we were always joking about the crooks and nannies, so there you go. Oh. Are we having fun yet?
Yes. That's what I came here for.
Oh, so let me make sure. I guess we're all off in terms of sound. I can mess with things in Discord, and I can mess with things. I can't change individually in OBS. I can't change Mike and Lauren's sound. They're on my desktop, so it's all one thing. But I did change it in Discord, so that's, again, this is the best I can do. And I don't even have an education in this. This is not something that I've ever done any training in. And the one person that I'm really close to that that does have education in this, personally, I'm not close to physically right now. He's 1,000 miles away, so there's not really much I can fix here. So, sorry guys. But hopefully
I
it
can
doesn't
turn
sound
myself
too
down.
bad. Well, yeah, you're not the one who's too loud. No, you should go right back to where you were.
I
Everything's...
thought we were both too loud and you were too quiet. Is that?
Nope.
Oh.
I had... See, for some reason, when we go from our live show chat to our after show chat or other chats that we bounce around in, different chats show different people's microphones at different volumes for me. So when we go from show to after show, sometimes I have to turn Lauren way up, or I have to turn Lauren way down, or I have to turn Mike way up, or I have to turn Mike way down. And I actually have you guys at different volumes now in Discord because of that. It's a mess. And I really do need to get... Brian has a thing that he uses to equalize. I need to get an app to run sound
I have
through.
a thing I used to equalize. It's just called dynamics processing. It's a simple effect that you can use in any of these audio editing software things, and that's why you should go to Spreaker.com. I guess / Honey Badger Radio, so that you can see the edited versions of these that don't have the long silences at the beginning or the end. I know you all don't care about this because you're listening to this live, and you put up with all the technical difficulties that come with doing it live. But I hope for some shout outs to anyone who's listening to this in the Spreaker.com archive.
There we go. Alrighty. While we were discussing the technical difficulties, we did get to Super Chows, which I'm going to read. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 322, honey for the badgers. And Meredith G gave us another $5 and said, HBR Talk 322, Washington warned against the problem of political parties. What he was warning was the problem of the professional political class. He believed that men like himself owed service to the people to serve in government for a short period of time, and when you're done, you return to your life at home. That is why he created the tradition of only serving 2 terms. And yeah, that tradition was honored for a long time, and then we got a president who decided to just stay and died in office, and then 2-term limits were enacted because we didn't want that to happen again. And honestly, I think that should be a government-wide thing. Not just term limits for people who run for public office, but even stricter term limits for the bureaucracy. There shouldn't really be that much of a bureaucracy. We have way more than we need in terms of departments and agencies in our government. There's quite a bit of stuff that is being done by the federal government that should be left to the states and to the counties and even to local communities, to the municipalities. But if there's going to be a bureaucracy of any kind in Washington, you should not be able to make a career out of serving in it. It should again be, as Washington believed, a service that you do for a short period of time, and when you're done, you take that experience back to the public sector and you work for an actual private business, and that's where you earn your living. And in fact, working in government really ought to be something that people can use as a jumping off point. Say, oh, I have this many years of experience working in public service, and I learned these things from working in public service, and it's the maximum you're allowed, 4 or maybe 8 years, depending on what type of service it is, aside from military service, which I don't see a problem with people making a career out of being ready to defend their country. But, yeah, this idea that you go into, say, the Health and Human Services Department, and you work in collecting child support, or handing out welfare, or administering Medicare or Medicaid for 30 years, and you collect retirement from the government, and you have a union and all of that. No, that should not happen. But unfortunately, not only is it happening, but when we, the people, try to elect someone who wants to enact reforms in the federal bureaucracy, the bureaucracy reacts to that like an immune system reacting to a virus. Pretty scary, because they're all unelected. Right? We basically have the blob running our country. But, again, tonight we're going to look at why. And what that has to do with women voting. So,
everything is my guess.
Yeah.
I'm just so disturbed by our state right now, the state of our government, the political situation. I don't know. I'm not going to go into it. I think everyone who understands where we are coming from and agree with us don't really want to see this thing take office, because that would just be an atrocity. But there's no need for me to go into it. We can go on with the show.
Yeah, this is HBR Talk, not the Honey Badger Horror Show.
Yes.
Jeez, Pete. Oh. All right. So, I'm not gonna start at the start of this. I'm gonna point out instead some of the things that she had to say about this. And this is, by the way, let me see if I can do here. Where's our... Yeah. I believe... Yeah, it does say who she is, and I want to make sure I point that out, because of course it doesn't let me make it bigger that way. There we go. President, National Association opposed to women's suffrage. Remember, this was an association that had many members. This was actually pretty big. This was much bigger, in fact, than the suffragettes at that time. So we get back to the original page here. So what she had to say, she said, women suffragists are proposing a doubled electorate. And she's thinking of it in terms of most people getting married and raising families in society. She's probably not thinking about the fact that many men throughout history have not gotten married and raised children. Many men throughout history have not found anyone to marry, or if they did marry and have children, they couldn't be sure that their children were their children. Alright, so there is that issue as well. But and one of these days, and I'm going to end up having to do a show about the exploitation of incels throughout history by governments, because that is a thing, and I don't think very many people have considered it. I think the reason that modern governments are so scared of incels right now in Western nations is because all of a sudden, because they are networking and they have a name for their situation and they are protesting against their situation, and they do recognize the role of women's social attitudes in their situation, they're not so easily exploitable anymore.
Well, listen, I think what's happening is now colloquially in more common parlance, incel is being interchanged with men.
Yeah, that is happening.
With,
That is
you
happening.
know, so it sorry, I lost what I was going to say, but that's what's happening. It's just another term that they can paint any man with, and screw it. It just means all men now.
Yeah,
All men that I don't like.
if you want to turn a term that people are using to describe themselves into a pejorative, you use it to shame men.
Mm-hmm.
That's how that works. But the thing about incels is, if you look back throughout history, right, when governments have sought men to use as cannon fodder in wars, in petty wars against each other, in wars over territory, in wars over resources, and so on, they go for the men who do not have children. Right? They go for the men who are not supporting families, who don't have businesses at home, who aren't wealthy. And usually those are all the same group. Not wealthy, not married, not raising children. Usually those are all the same group. And that's men who are involuntarily celibate because of either their appearance or their lack of income or combination thereof. Maybe they are socially awkward. Um, Maybe they are socially inept. And I mean, I've known guys that are just completely clueless socially. And very, very intelligent. Great people who would give you the shirt off their back if they thought that you needed it, without you even asking. But they wouldn't know how to offer it in a way that women wouldn't judge them for doing.
Yeah, in a way that wouldn't give women the ick.
Yeah. Well, here's the secret about giving women the ick, okay? When it comes to social interaction, 9 times out of 10, when a woman gets the ick, she gave it to herself.
Mm-hmm. I would say, well, yes. I won't say 100% of the time, but
And
yeah.
honestly, there are people who have boundary issues, and there are people who are malicious. Though they exist in the world, I've run into quite a few of them. But most of the time, when women are just like, I don't want anything to do with this person, and then they play victim of proximity and engagement with somebody that they're not interested in, they have given themselves the ick by deciding that unattractive equals malicious and
Mm-hmm.
unattractive equals having boundary issues. How dare you exist in front of me when you look like that? Or when you don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to use the right words to say the things that you're trying to say to make them interesting to me. And it's not fair. But it's pretty typical in regard to the way women are pretty entitled when it comes to social interaction.
Very.
To have that social interaction be dictated by women's comfort level and women's interests, right? That's a huge entitlement that women exhibit, and they don't budge on that. And if
Mm-mm.
you're a woman who doesn't go along with it, you get eviscerated by other women. And I'm not just talking about online. I mean, I've seen that happen in the workplace. I've been on the receiving end of it quite a lot in my life because I don't have the same comfort zone that most women do. So, and I don't always know when I'm boring other women. So I end up getting eviscerated quite a lot for that. And it's usually not women women's judgment doing it. It's usually things like, women going to this authority or that authority and finding some excuse, to say that they're uncomfortable or unsafe or unhappy with me not acting like a normal woman, and I'm in the wrong for it. So like this is how I'm able to see this. I'm not like Superwoman who has this special angelic sympathy for guys. I got a tiny little taste of what y'all experience, and I didn't like it, and realized that if that's what it's like for me, it must be absolute hell when it happens to you guys. So Nobafan gave us $1 and said, I've seen the term incel used for a man with a wife and 2 kids. That said, some people think not getting laid enough in a marriage qualifies men as an incel. Well, yeah. I mean, cel stands for celibate, and in stands for involuntary. So if a guy is married and he's in a sexless marriage, which does happen, and he's in a sexless marriage not because of any health conditions that he has that make him unable to perform, or his wife has that make her unable to perform, but that she's just not engaging with him anymore. That is involuntary celibacy. Right? And there is, there's a rather large phenomenon of that. The older you get, the more women just lose interest in sex. Or at least they lose interest for some reason in the men that they promise to love most in the world until death do them part. I don't get it.
The equivalent appears to be a crazy cat lady.
Yeah.
Which is something we got into 3 Tuesday shows ago.
Mm-hmm.
When we got into the JD Vance thing about how we're being ruled by crazy cat ladies or whatever it is, and it's this ability to what's the verb to sort of cast your loneliness elsewhere, to distract everyone from the real problem of men and women getting separated. I mean, they were always separated by sexual biology, but they were always kept together by sexual psychology, and now we're dealing with a rather large movement that is
crazy
is trying to use sexual psychology as a wedge between the central pins of the nuclear family. And I don't want to call it the nuclear family, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That was just that was just an attempt to pin into modern parlance the best possible way for a civilization to advance itself, for families to be together.
Yeah, united.
That sounds so obvious from such an obvious perspective, but yeah. Here we are in this world where we have to remind people that family is a good thing.
So before we get into the actual article, I'm going to point out a difference, a huge, huge difference between incels and crazy cat ladies. All right. The thing about animal hoarding, and the crazy cat lady is an animal hoarder. Everybody always says, well, if you have more than 4 cats, well, there's a jumping off point, right? A woman gets to about 4 cats and stops usually. You don't see women with 5 cats very often, or 6 cats very often. You see, some women with 1 or 2, maybe 3. I lived with my parents for a few years, and I had 2 cats. And my mom had a cat. So we had 3 cats in the house. And that was too many. And that was a big house. Because my grandparents had moved in. And we were taking care of them. And originally, my mom's cat was my grandmother's cat. And So the house, we built an in-law apartment onto that house for my grandparents to live in. And it was a 2-story house when my parents purchased it during the housing market crash in the 70s. So it was a big house. And if it had been in a better part of town, economically speaking, because there was no better part of town in terms of the people that lived around us. It was all around a good town, but it would have been a $250,000 house at some points during my life. But it wasn't, because houses in our neighborhood didn't sell for that much. So, and it's in any case, that was still too many cats for that size house. But I've seen women, like, you stop at 4 cats, and then there's women with, 10, 15, 20. I heard from a woman once that had dozens of cats. Like the lady that is in the meme with the heavy metal music and the cats jumping over each other to get the food. And she considered herself a cat rescuer, but they were all strays. And it's just like, well, you're not really rescuing them. We kind of do that here, in that we trap them, and we take them to Siska, and Siska spays and neuters and gives them their rabies shots so that they don't spread rabies throughout the community, and so that we don't end up with dozens of kittens every 6 weeks or so, however long it takes for cats to have kittens. It's been a while since I've had a female cat that could have kittens. And because cats will overrun an urban neighborhood pretty quickly if they're not kept under control. Right? So it's more about preserving the neighborhood for the people than it is... I mean, you can think of it as a kindness to the cats, in that you're keeping their population from outgrowing their resources, but when you see pet hoarding, you're seeing a person with boundary issues, because they are using the animals as emotional Kleenex. Right? Emotional toilet paper. Emotional puke buckets. And they're substituting animals for doing things about the issues in their lives that make them upset, or make their lives difficult, make them unhappy. And that's an issue. And that's when we talk about the crazy cat lady. We're talking about someone who has, some sort of mental health condition, usually. Some sort of emotional baggage, right? And is making the animals do the emotional labor by being dependent. And that's... You don't really see that necessarily. Like, incels, they have pretty caustic humor, right? They will get really sarcastic. They will get really sardonic. They will say things that the general public is like, you can't say that. They'll joke about suicide. They'll joke about all kinds of subjects that people find uncomfortable, and they will lay bare truths about women that everybody is uncomfortable knowing, that really should be confronted. But we don't, because everybody is uncomfortable knowing. And it's a major difference. Incels get accused of having boundary issues because they are sad and lonely because of the way women treat them. And they articulate the fact that they feel wrongfully judged over things that are really shallow as criteria for relationships. And they're not wrong. Right? They are wrongfully judged in a lot of ways. Whereas crazy cat ladies, like the single crazy cat ladies, because I have also met crazy cat ladies in relationships with men. You know, that the man is miserable because 17 cats come and go from the house, and it stinks. And it really stinks. But, having that degree of boundary issues with regard to your treatment of animals and your exploitation of them as, like I said, emotional Kleenex, emotional toilet paper, emotional puke buckets, that translates over to people too. And you see that in the way that they vote, in the way that they exploit government programs, in the way that they engage with the people in their neighborhood. If you see a woman as the president of an HOA, she's probably got more than 4 cats. You know, but she might say that you can't have big dogs, right? Francus Maximus, yeah, that's a lot of cat poo from 17 cats, but cats bury their poo. That's not the problem. Cat pee has a lot of ammonia in it. It is horribly foul-smelling. And a cat hoarder's house, the smell of a cat hoarder's house permeates the neighborhood. You know, like, if you have a sensitivity at least to ammonia.
It's like your drug of choice. You can't smell it, but the people who are not subjected to it all the time, they can absolutely smell it.
Even caffeine. Caffeine makes you stink. People are getting paranoid now, right? But you can smell the difference between a coffee drinker and somebody who doesn't drink anything caffeinated. You can smell the difference between a Mountain Dew drinker and a coffee drinker, especially when they pee, because sugar also makes you stink. But in any case, that's more of a getting into the weeds thing. The main thing is, that difference between women who have difficulty making relationships with the opposite sex and the people around them versus men who have difficulty making relationships. Men who have difficulty making relationships have a tendency to go fuck off and be by themselves. Women who have difficulty making relationships put their difficulty out for everybody to have to deal with it. And they sort of vomit their difficulty all over the neighborhood. And they layer their difficulty on top of their pets, their family members, their friends, their neighbors. Like it's women in general have boundary issues, so this is just an extension of that, I guess. But that attaches to this in one particular way. So she points out women suffragists are proposing a doubled electorate to support which an increase in the state budget is necessary. And for people to understand that, they have to pay, the government has to pay for a location. And of course, back in the day when voting was all done on paper, there were materials to buy. People had to either volunteer for or be paid to do that work. And you might volunteer and get paid, just not very much. And of course, then there's also the effect it has on the community. When you have polling taking place, that area is going to be extremely busy for a day. But in any case, so there's an increase that has to be funded, right? You have twice as many people showing up at the polls. You need more workers. You need more materials. Therefore, the burden of proof rests solely on the suffragists to show how the double electorate can or has become a better instrument of government for the people. In this connection, it is interesting to note that not a single law, not one improvement is or can be claimed as the exclusive result of the votes of women. The male suffrage states lead. This is something that history has forgotten, by the way. She's mentioning the male suffrage states because there were states that from the beginning allowed women to vote. And as new states came into the Union, there were several of them that came in with women's suffrage just written into their state constitutions. So women voted in... Wyoming is one of those that is sort of historically talked about as from the moment Wyoming became a territory, women were clamoring for voting rights. And before Wyoming became a state, women got their voting rights there. And so Wyoming entered statehood with women's suffrage intact. But yeah, so she says the male suffrage states lead in mothers, pensions, in child labor, limitation of hours, for working women, maternity acts, supervision of dairies, pure food, weights and measures, extension of educational facilities, improved sanitation, etc. The great eastern states have worked out their social problems without women's suffrage to a higher standard than that reached by the states where women vote. So I'm going to reread that line. Eastern states have worked out their social problems without women's suffrage to a higher standard than that reached by the states where women vote. So not only did women voters not improve the standards for women, not only did women voters not represent the interests of women, the apparent interests of women, their complaints that they were all making, no. They were a detriment. Or at least they appeared to have been. On the other hand, a great increase in taxation, a multiplicity of useless laws. Gee, women voting for useless laws? Women getting caught up in useless rules, lawyering, rule-mongering? Imagine my shock. And a practical doubling of public office holding. Women growing the government without any compensating gain for the citizens is the accompaniment of votes for women. So what's her argument there? When you think about this, her argument is women voting did not get women anything. Women voting screwed things up for the whole community. Women voting created frivolous offices, frivolous public offices, the bureaucracy that I was complaining about earlier. The thing that I actually have been lambasted for posting a meme about this on X, explaining that the moment that women got voting rights, universal voting rights, they started growing a bureaucracy that is pretty much eating their children's inheritance. Right? Our kids and our grandkids, their future labor is already mortgaged by our government. And that came from women's voting rights. That came from women's voting habits. The thing that the evil incel that our government is so terrified of and that feminists hate so much lovingly refers to as Gibbs. And lovingly, of course, in case you couldn't tell, sarcasm. I can imagine how annoying it must be for them because women won't give them the time of day, won't have anything to do with them, won't have any compassion for them, but they sure want every penny they can squeeze out of them. She asks, can one tax represent both? It is a question in politics parallel to a question in business as to whether one partner can represent a firm. As an isolated individual, an absolute unit of humanity with no allegiance or attachment to any other unit, women would seem to require a vote if voting were the only means of adequately representing her in government. But the unit of society is not the individual, but the family. Neither man nor woman is complete, but the complemental characteristics of both make up the whole into the smallest safe division of society, the family, a partnership for the propagation of the race and the happiness of men, women, and children. No one would contend that the salesman does not represent the firm or that the factory foreman does not represent the firm. Thousands of partnerships exist where one man sells what the other makes. Neither can succeed so well in the other's place, and each fully represents the business as to the representative fields of production and distribution. So what she's talking about there is, I guess, staying in your lane, knowing what your role is comprised of and what actions you need to take in order to fulfill it, and what actions are going to be beneficial to the unit that you have created by taking on that role, whether it's father, husband, mother, wife, business partner. A family unit is a business unit, and so on. As an actual fact, readily ascertained by government statistics, the partnership of parentage, the union of one man and one woman in marriage, is the most successful enterprise in the business of civilization. With all its fruits and alleged failures, less than 1% of the persons who enter into this partnership dissolve it by divorce. So that's what the statistic was before two things happened. One, women got the right to vote, and two, we got the type of divorce law that is affectionately called no-fault divorce. But no-fault divorce isn't real. There is no such thing as no-fault divorce, right? What we had before, what we call no-fault divorce, was when you abandon a partnership, the partnership of marriage, if you don't have a good reason because the other person is at fault by having committed adultery or by having abused you in some way, then you're at fault because you're abandoning a perfectly good partnership. A partnership that has not gone bad, right? And as a result of your fault, you are not able to leave that marriage and take the children and take half of the finances or more with you. You're not entitled to marital property. You're not entitled to bankrupt your partner because you're leaving, right? That's how fault divorce works. If your partner does something to make it insufferable for you to stay, like to make the environment dangerous to you, or to betray you and betray the partnership and the family, that's a different story. Well, then the partner is at fault, and you can kick the partner out and keep everything, right? Including the children. But now that we have what's called no-fault divorce, our law treats all divorce like his fault divorce. She cheats and leaves, his fault, he has to pay. She abuses him and he has to leave, his fault, he has to pay. Right? She gets bored and leaves, his fault, he has to pay. So there is no such thing as no-fault divorce. It's bullshit. And we went from less than 1% when this was written to not only did we at one point we had a 50% divorce rate, pretty close to 50%. Now we have many people, more than are getting married now, are just not. They're remaining single, or they're not making their commitment to each other public by getting married. And that's marriage. The whole point of marriage was, you're not just making your promise when you get married. You're not just making your promise to your partner. You're also promising your community, and if you are religious, your church, your religious institution. Not everybody calls their religious institution a church, but more people in relationships today than ever are not making their promise public. And I mean, there's solid reasons for that. Because his fault divorce pretty much makes making your commitment public very dangerous for men. So, and feminism has taught women that marriage is a trap, when in fact marriage is a shield, and a safe haven for women. It should be a safe haven for men, but women have taken that away. But yeah, so less than 1%. That's a hell of a low divorce rate compared to now. On the other hand, it is so popular that over 60% of all males and 70% of all females over 15 in the United States are married, while only 7% of the human race in America rounds out its 70 years without embarking in this most vital business, the pursuit of happiness by men and women. So only 7% of Americans were hitting 40 without being married at that point in time. Only 7%. I don't know if everything she's saying there is accurate, but I will say this. It is quite interesting. It's quite interesting that this was published in a publication that was a major publication at a time when, people relied on print news. There were no, there wasn't television, right? There wasn't an internet. People didn't communicate over great distances cheaply and easily. You could send telegrams, but you paid, I think, per word in a telegram. It might even have been per letter. And so that would be expensive. So you got your news from the New York Times. You got your news from your local newspaper. Right? There was none of this alternative media publications. It was expensive to do that. You either had to shell out a lot for a lot of paper and type it up yourself, or own a printing press. I mean, there is gossip, but it's not the same. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And this level of change, right, in a century after women got voting rights. And the one sentence here at the bottom, and this is there's more to this article, but this is all that's in this paper. Feminism is the theory of individualism, an unnatural assumption of sex. Right? Feminism is the theory of individualism. Feminism separates women from men. It's like breaking apart the yin and the yang. It's like,
how is that individualism though? You're just saying that we're a group of people that don't identify as that group of people. That's not individualism.
Not in terms of rugged individualism, no.
Yeah.
But it is isolationism.
Exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Exactly.
And isolating women from men is probably the worst disservice feminism ever did. Not so much in terms of, men and women can't act as individuals, but the amount, degree, scope, level, depth, breadth, every measurement you can think of what men have done throughout history for women is so astronomical that an ordinary person couldn't measure and understand it. Where we are today in terms of security, safety, survivability, nothing. We have comforts that our ancestors couldn't even comprehend. We do things easily and without even thinking about them. Like, we zone out in the middle of doing things that our ancestors couldn't even comprehend. And I cook something, I read a recipe, and it tells me what temperature to use. And our ancestors didn't have that. That's such a simple little thing. Oh, set your oven for 350 degrees for this. But for this, you're going to set it at 400 degrees. Or for this, you're going to set it at 425 degrees. You didn't have that. You had fire. You cooked with fire. Right? And that's just one thing, right? Having indoor plumbing, having a transportation system, having a community where housing and businesses are separate because somebody designed how things were going to be built and where things were going to be built, that it was planned and not just randomly, like this is here and that's there. Men did that. Having buildings that don't collapse every time the wind blows too hard. Men did that. Having buildings that won't even collapse when the ground shakes like hell. When the ocean comes in and washes everything else away and the building is still left. Men did that. Having food so readily available that there are women who get all heated and place want ads about how people shouldn't hunt. They should go to the grocery store and buy meat there so that nothing had to be killed for it. Because they don't realize that that is still dead animals. Dead animal flesh, right? Women are that comfortable enough to be that ignorant. Because men made things that easy.
People talk about the cuisine of various countries, like that represents a stereotype of those countries. But like you were just saying, people talk about the English like they don't know how to cook food. But the English have been hanging around for centuries, just like the French, just like the Italians, just like the Spanish. And they've been discovering recipes. They haven't been writing them down. I mean, I guess some of them have. But most recipes are not written down. They're passed down orally from generation to generation. And the reason history doesn't remember all of those amazing English dishes is because England was the first country to industrialize. And as they industrialized, these people dispersed. The English dispersed across the country, largely to America, and largely to other places. And so, if they ever did write down their recipes, it was once they got to these other places. This is why this myth persists that the British make crap food. They don't. The British brought their food to America. And yes, all right, yeah, fair enough. There's a lot to be said about American cuisine. That's, well, they got a lot of it from Scotland, to be honest. Deep frying everything and just loading cheese on top of everything. Yeah, that's the Scottish cuisine. That's where you got that. And that's why I say British, because it's not just English.
Yeah.
We are a country of countries.
Well, to be fair, American food is British and Scottish, Irish, Scandinavian, Spanish, Mexican, German, Russian, everything. Italian, Chinese. American food is everything. And we have a habit of modifying and mixing what people brought here in terms of their traditions and their let's try these things together. Let's try taking this Mexican dish and we're gonna Americanize it by doing it in a way that people from Ireland might do or people from Italy might do, as opposed to people from Mexico. And then you end up with new iterations and incarnations of different types of food. And it's how things like Tex-Mex get created. Well, it's not exactly the same as what you would get if you went to Mexico and someone's mom cooked for you. It's different. Some of them are really great. Some of them are really localized. You couldn't pay me to eat boiled peanuts, for instance. I didn't like them. But they're sold on just about every street corner in the South. And people love them, apparently. I can't develop a taste for it for some reason. They don't taste right because I'm used to them roasted. Right? But yeah, there's been a lot of change that has taken place just specifically due to all of that immigration and mixing and stirring and everything. But when it boils down to it, to use a good cooking term, it all boils down to the fact that all of that innovation and all of that change and all of that development occurred as a result of men having the guts to explore the world. Because women will just get their asses comfortable someplace and stay there forever. And even if it becomes uncomfortable, they'll be afraid to go someplace else. And so they won't. Unless the men assure them, we can handle this. We can handle what you're afraid of. Let's get out of here. And then they'll go.
It's the difference between hunting and gathering. You gather what you already know you are able to gather. You hunt whatever you are opportunistically able to hunt. This is why agriculture didn't happen until many thousands of years into human existence. People figured out, I say people, I mean men, figured out how to get the largest possible calorific return from the flora and fauna of the world. And then they figured out agriculture. And sort of women told them, this is good that you have done this. You need to do this more. And then men went, okay, we'll do this more. Can we carry on hunting and gathering? And then, yeah, carry on doing that as well. We appreciate the odd pig here and there. And yeah, we're talking scales of tens of thousands of years here. That men have been leading the culinary revolutions, starting with hunting pigs, and then eventually leading towards the agricultural revolution. And there's an awful lot of people who like to claim that the agricultural revolution was because of the divine influence of women. all being here going, you should cultivate, because cultivation is good. Not with animals, that would be cruelty against animals, but just plants. Because plants are not alive. Oh wait, they are alive. But that doesn't matter, they don't suffer in the same way animals do. So you need to keep killing plants because they don't have faces that make me feel sad when they die. And this has been going on for a while now.
And what's funny is
the virtue signaling of you should kill plants because even though they're alive, they don't make me sad when we kill them. So you should kill all the plants, but never kill any of the animals, because I feel sad when you kill animals. I don't feel sad when you kill plants. But they're both alive. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is my emotions. What we have to kill something in order to get food to stay alive. It's the same with every species. Devour to survive, so it is, so it's always been. I know there's a lot of Jainists and a lot of weird-ass fucking Buddhists who like to think they can survive without ever killing another organism, but you can't. You literally can't.
Well, what's funny about it is
the only things you can eat are other organisms, and there's a certain direction of the culture war that's been led by women. It's been going, no, well, I guess we do need to eat, but if we can do it without making me feel bad about the faces that we're eating, can we do that instead? And men have just gone along with it and said, yeah, I guess. We'll have to go through an ancient revolution and then a medieval revolution and then a Renaissance revolution so that we can get to the point where we can make vegetables taste like meat in order to appease this need you have to continue to eat things in order to survive, but as long as you don't have to eat anything that has a face. And we've been sat here this whole time going, fucking everything has a face. Plants just they just have a face on every side of their body. I know it doesn't have eyes. I know it's difficult eating a
not
fish
their face.
because it has eyes, but you need to get over this obsession you have with pareidolia, I believe is the word.
What plants have front and center for us to look at, and what women shove their faces into, and so on, when they're enjoying flowers, and that's genitalia. You are sniffing plant pussy every time you do that, or penis, basically. Like, and I can make fun of it because I don't do that because I'm allergic to that shit. So there you go. But what's really funny about this is it's not something that women did historically. It's something that women did hysterically. and it's a relatively modern thing. Meat used to be more scarce in terms of availability before people started cultivating animals for food, which people did because animals are yummy and very nutritious, the type that we cultivate for food, obviously. Carnivores aren't all that nutritious, but animals that eat plants, very nutritious. But yes, it is a manifestation of privilege. Having feelings about prey, having sad feelings and sympathetic feelings about prey, and I don't mean like a lot of tribal people had feelings of respect for the will to live that other life forms have, and the fight they put up, and the fact that they are living things and it's part of a cycle and a circle of life and all that. Like that's not what I'm talking about. The whole namby-pamby, oh, the poor things, we shouldn't be eating them, we're better than that. Like that attitude, you go back a couple hundred years when family farming was much more common and most people had an animal or two, maybe more than a couple hundred now years, but that sympathy, nobody could afford that kind of sympathy for them. Nobody could afford to get feelings about, we're going to kill this chicken. Like, you eat or you die, and you need meat if you want to have the strength to do the labor that you need in order to survive, in order to have a house that doesn't leak and doesn't let the wind in the wintertime, in order to have clothing, in order to have the ability to go places and do things, and in order to have more food in the wintertime, which you have to preserve yourself because there isn't some, company freeze-drying it. It's just up to you. And you better do it right, or it's going to make you sick as hell and you might die from eating it. So, people didn't... There was no, oh, it has a face. No. You get hungry, you go outside, you grab a chicken, you cut its head off, you put it in boiling water, you pull its feathers off, you gut it, and you ate the guts, too. Quite a bit. You ate the feet. You ate the heads. People have gotten squeamish because of luxury. And that's the downside of male innovation, is that women had room to become wimps. And they did. Albert Nader Retro gave us $10 Canadian and said, women shouldn't vote because they aren't obligated to serve. End of story. Want to see world peace? Have the UN make it mandatory that any country with conscription or a draft make it gender neutral. Well, here's the thing about the UN. Nobody has to listen to them. Right? Countries can be part of the UN or they can choose not to. They're not the world government. They may think they are, but they're not. But I see your point in terms of making it gender neutral. And there should be some manner in which women are obligated to serve. Even if it's not picking up a gun and defending your country, there should be some manner in which women are obligated to serve. Because women do vote. And women do demand gibs that come at the expense of men's taxes. And it's mostly men paying those taxes. Even now, when the labor force has so many more women than it used to, it's still mostly men paying those taxes. So, we're going to go on to the next bit here, and this is still Mrs. Arthur M. Dodge. Again, a reminder, using her husband's name gave her more gravitas than using her own. And so she was relying on his credibility in the community. Women did things in their husband's name, and feminists and anti-feminists alike did not want to end that. They just wanted the rights that women, or that men have, that made those names so important. The anti-social contract says being obligated to serve should not entitle you to suffrage. It depends on the service. If it's coming at the cost of your life, if you can be obligated to go and die for something, you should have a say in the decision-making process. If your property is going to be confiscated by the leadership that is getting voted for, you should be included in the vote. But that said, I don't think anybody should be able to vote to send anybody else to war or confiscate anybody else's property. So, make what you will of that.
Especially those who they themselves are not subject to the same standards.
Right. But even if you were, like, every community does this in America. I don't know if this is a worldwide thing or not, but our school systems, you have 3 directions that funding comes from in terms of government funding for local school systems. You have federal funding, and then you also have state funding, and then different municipalities that have their own school systems will also do tax levies, where they will put on the ballot, do you vote to have your taxes raised this tiny little bit that we can skim off of your paycheck to add to the school's budget in our community. Just our community, not money that goes to the state and then might go to some other school instead. And people vote on that. And obviously more parents are going to vote yes because their kids are going to school. Business owners are going to vote yes because they want students from that school system to have the benefit of locally funded education systems that with local interests involved. And local businesses sometimes will even get involved in the school system and offer educational programs and stuff because of that as well, because they want workers to have specific knowledge, and so they will offer to provide that specific knowledge so that your kids will graduate from high school and go to work for them. It sounds like a great idea until you realize that people who never have children still have to pay those taxes. People who don't own businesses and aren't going to hire anybody still have to pay those taxes. And then it starts to sound a little less fair. Why should they have to pay those taxes? People will say, well, you're benefiting from it because the workers in your community are better educated. Oh, great. Now you've just trained my competition. Like, you made me pay for my competition to get training that I can't afford to go out and get on my own. Right? That's what the childless person has a right to yell at you. If you say, well, yeah, you should be voting for the tax levy for schools. What kind of asshole doesn't want to fund the local school system? Don't you care about children? Well, they're not his children or her children. They're your children. Take care of them. Don't expect the community to do that for you. That's a kind of a harsh thing for parents to have to face. But in a lot of ways, we've developed into a society where parents leech off of the community instead of creating a growth within the community that will serve the community. The family unit used to be part of what served the community. Families would build the strength of the community. And we now have a situation where families expect gibs from the community. And people wonder why our society and our civilization has gotten weaker. That's why. Albert Edoretto gave us another $2 Canadian and said, "Oh, I almost forgot. Ketchup, women most affected." And on a side note, during the 80s, in school lunches, ketchup being added on the side for you to use, or being added to your burger and so on, that counted as a vegetable. A serving of vegetables. So it's not necessarily always beneficial to the kids when we pay for these publicly funded services with the idea that the kids are going to get something great out of it. Oh, look, lunchtime. Here, have some ketchup. Don't you feel revitalized? Great nutrition. Just like Mom makes at home. So, Mrs. Dodge says, "I don't want to seem discourteous toward my sisters in the suffrage movement. I believe the greater portion of them are not really aware of what they do. I am certain the majority of them did not desire to bring about the destruction of the home, with all that must imply, or of loose or no domestic life. I believe many of them to be good mothers, and that among their younger workers there may be girls who are not infected and who will not become infected with the horror of the highest function given to women by her God, that of motherhood." So she's pointed out the best thing a woman can become is a mother.
It's still amusing to me that people with American or Canadian accents cannot pronounce the difference between whore and horror. Now, I'm not having a go. There's all sorts of things that are indistinguishable in British accents. No, it doesn't until you're trying to pass all of these things. It's like the British accent not having a difference between law and law, as in lore and law. And
but law is lore.
Exactly. But is horror horror? This is one of those things. This is one of those inconsequential things that amuses me whenever Americans or Canadians talk about horrors like they're not horrors, because they pronounce them the same way.
Wait, and you know the difference between a whore and a prostitute, right?
Horror. That's the difference.
Well, you know, a prostitute provides a service. It's a cynical activity, right? But a whore is just disloyal. That's why we refer to cheating whores. But, and there is a horror there because that is one of the ways that disease is spread throughout the community, and some of those diseases are particularly nasty. But she goes on.
It's why we call some people whores and some people sluts.
And some people horror shows.
Sluts are all well and good as long as they don't spread diseases. At that point, they're whores.
There you go.
Or
well,
whatever.
Or, you know, there's a line between whore and slut as well, and it's disloyalty, right? Because people think of a girl as slutty if she just likes sex a lot. But a slut can get into a relationship and reserve all of that for one guy. But a whore gets into a relationship and cheats. I don't know that I would call it ethical necessarily to be a slut.
But
just
at least
like,
a whore
yeah.
is a businesswoman who
Yeah.
can who can
Well,
draw
prostitute
some
is a
kind of
businesswoman,
contract.
right?
Yeah,
A
we need.
prostitute is a businesswoman.
There
Again,
aren't many words in the English language that can describe the average woman in the English speaking world. Whore doesn't quite do it. Slut doesn't quite do it.
yeah.
It's mobster is the closest I can think of.
Gangster whore. I don't know. But yeah, I mean,
And
you look
to
at
be
the difference
to be clear,
there. You
to be
know,
clear, her pimp is the business person. A
yeah, if
prostitute
she has one,
is an independent contractor.
depending on how independent she actually is. Because if she does have a pimp, she
Mm-hmm.
might not be all that independent.
Well, right.
Right, and she might be dependent on a human and a substance or several. But no, whore just does it, just screws around, right? So there you go.
Independent woman, but I need you to pay my bills.
I'm sorry, independent woman is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say that flat out.
I'm having a go at fucking Beyonce and Destiny's Child.
Yeah.
One of their songs was "You Gotta Pay My Bills," to pay my bills, and they had another song that was "I'm an independent woman."
Yeah, you're.
I can't remember the fuck that was, but you get the general idea. I'm an independent woman's, but I need you to pay my bills.
Yeah,
I
I don't
bells
know.
the right word?
I don't know more than a handful of women that I would call even remotely independent. I don't consider myself independent, because I'm married, and even though, my husband and I go back and forth annually between who earns more, and we tag team the bills and everything. If we got divorced or one of us died, the other would be in trouble economically. Like, we do depend on each other. We're a team. So I don't consider myself independent. I have an independent attitude about a lot of things. But that's not the same as being independent. And I don't know very many women, single or married, who can truly be called independent. In fact, I don't
There aren't
know
many
a whole
men
lot of
who can
men
be called
who can
independent
truly be
either.
called. Yeah, depending on your standards.
You have to entirely get off the grid and live in
Yeah.
the forest on your own, and very fucking few people can do that anymore.
True.
And not just because they don't have the training, because they've lost the training that we used to have many centuries ago, but because
Although most men
because
will earn their keep.
they've been so ground down by this fucking revolutionary communist government. It's like, no, you cannot survive by yourself. You need us.
Yeah.
GUC. You cannot possibly survive without us.
But most men will earn their keep. Most men will go out and work, and they will pay their bills. They will fix stuff if it breaks in their home. They will learn how to do things that they need done that they can't afford to pay someone else to do. Like, women, if they want something, this is like I talked about last week, or maybe Tuesday, not too long ago really, but our way of raising children differs very dramatically between boys and girls, right? Boys kind of get the sink or swim treatment. Like, they get thrown into the pond and told how to swim and then expected to do it. Whereas girls always have a floaty or a person holding them up. And that floaty came from somebody else. They didn't go out and get it themselves, right? And they're not expected to sink or swim. They're not expected to even learn how to swim. And it's always somebody else's fault if they drown. So we have this situation where men have a tendency to gain access to the resources that they need in order to live and be safe and comfortable, by going out and being proactive and doing what they need to do in order to acquire and achieve. And women, and this is partly in women's nature, because if you think about it, we've evolved to be this way over eons. But women, when women want resources or need resources to live and be safe and comfortable, the method that women most naturally fall to is expressing discontent. I don't have what I need. Hey everybody, I don't have what I need. Can you help me? And the answer is almost always yes, one way or another. And it's usually at men's expense. And men, for all of human history, have put up with that. The antisocial contract asks, never thought of this before, but is it really evolution if it's based on being dependent on others? Evolution is just a term for change that ends up being written into human nature, or the nature of the creature that is evolving. And you can consider it like de-evolution. But I don't think there was ever a point in the history of the organism where that was normal and natural. I think it's more we have changed from the normal and natural state where most animals have to go and do. Most animals are not helpless in adulthood. So rats, for instance, which are definitely considered a much lower life form than human. Lizards, bugs are not helpless. Right? We consider them much lower life forms. But women, because of female privilege, evolved to be helpless. It's not positive evolution. You could call it negative evolution. But there's nothing to go back to that is like this. There's nothing backwards that you can trace to devolve to that. If women had evolved to had changed to become more like, I don't know, an amoeba, right? Single-celled, something like that, then you could call it devolution. But it's not exactly a good way to describe it in terms of this type of change, because it's not a reversal, because there's not a point in history that you could go back to where this was normal and natural. We've gone sideways instead of advancing. And we've gone sideways in a really nasty direction, if that makes sense. But yeah. So her bit about women being mothers, there's a historical tendency to deify mothers. Right? I see what your problem is. The antisocial contract, I see what your problem is. You're thinking of evolution as betterment. Evolution isn't necessarily like that. Like, adaptive, yeah. There are evolutionary dead ends where something evolves into a non-workable adaptation and then ceases to survive long enough to reproduce, or ceases to reproduce. But it's still evolution from what they were, what their ancestors were, to the point where they hit that wall, right? And that's what we're in. That's the situation we're in now, if that makes sense. Right? But back to the mother thing. I would say that we shouldn't think of motherhood that way. We should think of motherhood as a huge responsibility. Not that women are obligated to become mothers, but that if you make a child, if you obligate a child to be dependent on you, you damn well ought to be prepared to fulfill that dependence and do a good job as a mother. The image that we have of mothers, that shouldn't be automatic, something that all mothers get credit for. It should be something that all mothers strive for, try to be. Right? This is the ideal. You want to give your kids the best start that they can have in life, and the best childhood that they can have. Right? It doesn't make you the best person. It means you're doing your job. And you took that job on purpose. Especially today, when you have like 40 different types of birth control available. You own no. And you own yes, but not with you. Or yes, but not right now. Yes, but not without this detail. Like, that's the, I don't know. It bugs me when mothers are deified or angelified or whatever. We're human. And we've taken on a responsibility that we should be obligated to live up to once we take it on. And if we don't, it's fair to shame us for it. And it's fair to hold us accountable.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, it makes a whole lot of sense when you think about why these days meritocracy is demonized. Oh, what you mean I have to earn this position? I have to earn this reward? I have to earn this anything? I mean, that's kind of where the fruit from that tree lands, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and women have this entitlement. Again, I will say entitlement. And when I say entitlement, I'm talking about a sense of entitlement. Not that women are owed this, but that women feel owed this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To be adored. To be venerated above men and above each other. To be treated like they can do no wrong. To be treated like they're victims of anything that comes along that's challenging. And to be treated like everything they do is an accomplishment. You know, and women will lambaste men for jokingly taking a huge shit like an accomplishment. But what the fuck do you think you're doing when you act like you are the end-all, be-all of goodness and mercy, independence and strength, ingenuity, all of the things that get attributed to welfare moms?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you just, not that your kids are shits, but that your actions are shit in that situation. You took a huge shit on your family and your society, and you want to be held up as a shining example of somebody who can do it all. Well, you take your food stamps to the grocery store, and you teach your children that relying on government for resources is a lifestyle. An acceptable lifestyle at that. Mangaka92 says, even single mother is a misnomer. You have to earn the title mother. Until then, you're just a single birthing person. I would say single mother is a misnomer because unless she has a job that pays enough money that she is independently paying her bills without relying on any government programs, without relying on any child support, she is not single.
Nope. Not by any stretch of the word.
Exactly. So, let's see. Where... I am completely lost as to where we were.
It's so tiny because I'm looking at it on my phone.
I know, it's so bad. Okay, that's why, because I had scrolled up too far. So she thinks that motherhood is the end-all be-all. Well, this is not to say that women just absolutely should be shamed for being mothers either. Like, obviously, I'm not going to say that. But the whole human race would die if men didn't become fathers and women didn't become mothers. There would be no children. There would be no next generation. Right? That'd be it. But no, that just if you're going to take on that responsibility, do the job. And if you're not going to do the job, don't take on that responsibility. Other people will. But she goes on, I am no advocate of retrogression among women. I believe in education, culture, full development. In these days, women do the best which in her lies for her own home. Must get much for it from the outside. That's a very awkwardly written sentence for modern times, but basically what she's saying there is, in the industrial age, women could be resource acquirers and not just wait for resources to be brought to them, and still be good mothers, still be good homemakers. Because in the industrial age, right, women's tasks in the home were less time consuming and less labor intensive than they had been historically. Right?
They were characteristic of the previous revolution. While men were doing the industrial revolution, women were doing the agricultural revolution. While men were doing the technological revolution, women were doing the industrial revolution, and so on and so forth. We have yet to see what the next revolution comes about, but I'm sure Ted Kaczynski has something to say about it from beyond the grave.
Probably. She goes
not
on.
that I'm supporting anything that Ted Kaczynski says. He was a Luddite, and a dangerous, violent Luddite at that. Progress, people. It doesn't necessarily mean being woke. There's such a thing as progress. That doesn't necessarily involve mutilating children. Progress can mean, that thing where we can talk to each other at light speed across the planet, or visit each other at sound speed across the planet. That sort of progress. That's the kind of progress that's good. The kind of progress that you're taught about in universities, where we can replace white people with black people. That thing, not so good. Not necessarily the way forward.
We used to be trying to live in harmony with each other at one point.
Yeah, imagine that.
Perfect harmony, no less. And I just got a song stuck in every Gen Xer's head. But the problem with Kaczynski wasn't that all of his ideas were bad. The problem is that he drew the conclusion that violence was the answer. Right?
No,
you can be right about You can be
No,
right about a bunch of things being wrong in society and not go straight to, so let's start blowing shit up.
Yeah,
Right?
this needs to be pointed out. In many ways, we can look back at the past of 50 years ago or 100 years ago and say, yeah, we had a better life because we weren't enslaved by these plasma screens that we have 24 hours a day and what have you. And yeah, you can be like, yeah, I guess back in the old days, kids used to hit each other up by riding bikes to each other's houses and going, "Hey, are you there?" And then they would join them on their joyful bike rides across the fields and the forests and what have you. And you can say, yeah, those were better days. When if anyone got lost in the forest, they would just get lost in the forest. They wouldn't have a phone with which to call their parents. It's like that meme you've probably seen about if Home Alone happened in the current decade.
Yeah.
Kevin would just text his mother saying, "Hey, I'm still here," and his mother would go, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Kevin. I'll come back right now." No movie. And so I mean, people talk about how things were so much better in the olden days, but honestly, if you had a time machine accident and you landed in the 50s, you'd die just from the knowledge that you're experiencing a much worse world. That if you can't disagree with anyone because you would have to go online and find someone 4,000 miles away that agrees with you. You wouldn't be able to, there would be no outlet for you to disagree with what you know is going to happen in the next 50, 70 years or so. Like, you'd be cursed with the knowledge of what's going to happen, but you wouldn't be able to do anything about it because there would be no alternative media. There would just be the TV, and you would be sat there with no Nintendo whatsoever.
And the worst part is you could write a book about it. You could write the whole manuscript out. You could make the greatest dystopian novel of all time. The story of what's really going to happen in the future. Yeah, and publishers would look at you and say, "This is too unrealistic. We can't publish this shit. This kind of thing would never happen."
I often imagine, because I've been on YouTube since 2007, and I often think, what if I got on board with this 7 years earlier than I did in the timeline in which we're in? What if as soon as I got on YouTube in 2007, I started talking about these men's rights issues? Nobody would care. Nobody would care. It's people like to think they can change the course of history by going back in time and being one human being, changing the timeline. But in reality, one human being's not going to do shit unless you happen to be the president of the United States or whatever. There's very little you can do as one person. Ideas happen because that idea's time has finally come.
Yeah, I can tell you what would have happened. Your channel wouldn't have grown. It would have remained very small, and most people wouldn't have even noticed it. This type of content, not what we're doing right now, but the type of discussion that we're having right now. This has existed since the beginning, before the beginning of the World Wide Web. This existed on Usenet. This existed in between, individual computers, people operating individual computers, dialing each other's individual modem numbers and so on to have conversations back and forth, talking on B-boards on a server and so on. And there have always been two things that have happened in regard to this type of discussion. The first one is only a small percentage of the people that had access to the particular forum that you were talking in took an interest in it at all. And among them were always people in positions of moderation capability. So they moderate the speech in one way or another, that would do their best to quash it because they didn't like it. And a lot of times it's because they didn't agree with it. Sometimes it's just because they didn't like politics. That's been my experience, because I've had sort of a one toe in discussing political issues since I found out in the 7th grade what abortion was, and then asked my grandmother what that meant and how it was done. And since she was a nurse, she explained it to me in very clinical terms, and it just completely plunged me into discussing how government operates and what it should be used for and how it should be limited and what kind of effects it should be allowed to have on people and what kind of effects people should be able to use it to have on each other. And so there you go. Like it's always been this idea of some great renaissance of political discussion where there's the freedom on the internet to discuss whatever you want, and everybody discusses politics and listens, and ideas get hashed out. It's really, people are so comfortable with just going to the polls, casting their vote, and expecting a specific result that they don't get into these arguments. They don't get into these discussions. And if they have to work at defending their ideas, they give up and walk away from it. A lot. Way too much. And that's something else that I'm gonna go back to this and read a little more of this, because it's really important to get this part across, and then we'll continue with more of this next week. So she's talking about here in the next sentence how women's advancement in education and business and in work and knowledge should be focused on what they can bring back to the home. How does it benefit my family if I go get this, basically, with that next sentence. I'm not going to go through and read the whole thing. But then it skips to another quote from, and I believe this is from the piece that we got to read part of earlier. Suffrage and the voluntary or forced entrance of women into industrial life is the greatest threat against the home. In a nation's home lies its strength. It would be a world tragedy if woman, in her blind, mistaken efforts to uplift herself, should bring ruin on the nation and destroy it herself. And what does the vote amount to? Women do not need it to accomplish really good things. A woman can do anything if she does not vote. She is likely to do little if she does. Only through constructive methods has any nation ever thrived. We women must be wives and mothers, and as wives and mothers, through increasingly good education, must build our children's character. We need more, not less, of the mother-daughter and mother-son influence. We must continue to build citizens through individual efforts. Machinery can never do it. And so one of the things that she's saying here is, because women have profound influence on the next generation, a woman's power can't be manifested in voting. A woman's power is manifested in social influence. And I will expand on that in one way, right? And I talked about this before. Women historically, instead of going to the polls and casting a vote and then just expecting the politicians they voted into office to do the things that they promised to do, women engaged in pressure campaigns, women engaged in public activism, women would make things to use for public benefit. Right? Women would raise money. Women would provide assistance if there's a disaster. I know it's the men are the ones going out with boats and vehicles and back in the day, horses and dogs and digging people out of rubble, rescuing people from floods and so on. And when they would bring people back, to a central place, a central, I guess, command, a central hub where the injured and the traumatized from disasters would be gathered together. It would be women who would be going through and feeding them, providing them with dry clothes, comforting them, and treating their wounds. There may be, doctors may have been men, but it was often women that were applying the bandages and changing them and holding someone's hand when they wake up from a nightmare and providing the nutrition and so on. Helping people find the rest of their family in the crowd, all of that. And that division of labor, yes, men were taking the greatest risk. And then when they would come back, the women would feed them and take care of them as well. And they would need somebody to do that. And that somebody could not be equally at risk, because if that happens and the risk doesn't pan out, then when the men come back, they end up having to do all of that themselves when they're exhausted and injured and maybe sick. So when women try to do everything that men do and be everything that men are, they lose the great things that women did. And those great things brought power, brought social influence. Because women were the ones dealing with that, then women would be the ones that would say, hey, we need this. Our community needs this. Our children need this. Our husbands need this. And they were the voice. But if they feel comfortable just substituting a vote for that, all of that disappears. And we've seen that happen throughout our whole civilization, all of Western civilization. Women have gone from largely being the people who do all of those services and provide all of that care to being the people on the street yelling, we're here, we're queer, and we're in your face. Right? Being the people demanding the right to kill their babies before they're born. Being the people demanding the right to impunity for women who lie about men, to men's detriment, to the degree of imprisonment for something that they didn't do. It's understandable why you would call that de-evolution. But yeah, she turned out to be right. The great destruction in our society that we have seen with women busy, school systems have not been held accountable. And over the last 70 years or so, our school systems have changed from a place where kids went to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic to learning how to be as dysfunctional as humanly possible and remaining ignorant about their history. So, I will say this. I'm not saying necessarily that women shouldn't take part in civics, in the processes of civics. What I am saying is that women should be very careful to not give up the power that they had, and to not substitute the laziest way of exercising civic power. Not to substitute that for all of the things that women have historically been able to do, because it does create a situation where pretty much nothing gets done by the people. Everything gets done by this elite class that has really made itself into what the Hunger Games portrayed. And with that, I think we are going to call it a night, because it's like 9:15. So I think I've read all the super chats. Yeah, that's the last super chat. I did read all the super chows. And I don't think we had the one Rumble rant here that I think I didn't read, because we had one that I did, and then I missed NobaFan's second one. NobaFan gave us another $1 and said, for anyone who likes the healthcare system in Canada or Japan, always know that best case scenario, your whole community fat shames you relentlessly, and Canada has the MAID program. I'm going to be honest, fat shaming, not a problem. Not a real problem. Right? Fat acceptance, pun intended, is a huge problem. It's very dangerous to the people who think they're benefiting from it the most. I've had my own weight problems in the last 10 years or so, and had never really experienced that in my youth. So I didn't really understand all of the ways that being fat can be a detriment to your health until I gained enough weight to hit, I was a few pounds shy of what is considered morbid obesity in medical terms before I realized just how bad it is. It affects every aspect of your health. And people who say they can be fat and healthy at the same time are full of shit. And actually, that's one of the things that's affected. You literally are full of shit. It affects your ability to poop. It's everything. So, my allergies are worse when I'm fat. I don't even know how that works. But I'm sure my doctor could explain it. He's had to explain a whole bunch of other connections to it. You really see a huge slide in your health, downturn in your health, when you get above the level of there's a high end of healthy, and then beyond that you start to get into metabolic disorders, and your metabolism affects everything else about your body, because it affects where your nutrition is distributed, how it's distributed, how much you make use of it, and how well you make use of it. And it's just not... Yeah. So yeah, the whole fat shaming thing, better to be overzealous about policing something like that, socially at least, because you can shame the shit out of somebody for something and they don't have to listen. They can say, fuck you, I'm going to be fat if I want to, right? But making it the norm for people to strive for a healthy weight, that's positive. But socializing medicine doesn't necessarily fix a lot of problems. In fact, it creates an incentive for rationing It creates an incentive for standardization in things that aren't standard, and it creates gatekeeping in a different way than money creates gatekeeping. And so you don't fix the problems that you've socialized to fix. And then you end up with things like Canada's MAID program, where you go to the doctor because you're depressed, and the doctor's like, well, would you like to commit suicide? No, I came here to get some kind of therapy so I can get back on my feet. I don't want to die. Not everybody who's depressed is suicidal. You know, and not everybody who's suicidal is suicidal forever either. So there is that. But yeah, you might want to reconsider the idea of something. There is no such thing as free with regard to somebody else's services. Either you are paying for it, or you are expecting someone else to pay for it. They're either paying for it with tax dollars, with their own money, or by spending their time. And everybody has a limited amount of that, and we don't all know exactly how small that limit is. So, yeah, there's no free healthcare. Free healthcare is not real. It's a lie. And you're probably paying for it. So, there you go. Gabriel Phelan Lucas asks, is there an after show? Yes, there is. And we have been going over an article that, at the point when I found it, was titled 69 Things Trump Has Said About Women. And it's literally just a listicle. The author didn't expand on any of the things. He just listed things that Trump has said about women. And some of them, he's cobbled together quotes that weren't even said in the same interview. But, so this is basically how, social justice warriors, how woke types freak out. You're just supposed to be offended. There's no explanation as to why you're supposed to be offended, how it was offensive, what's wrong with it. Trump said this thing! Can you believe that? He said words! So that's our after show. We're going to look at the words that have triggered the woke journalist, and talk about them. It's the last I looked, it was now 74 things that Trump has said about women. So he said 5 more things since, and I looked at the URL, and the URL indicates that the original title of the article was 61 things that Trump has said about women. So this guy's just adding to it. We may never get to the end of that article, because Trump talks maybe not more than me, but a lot. So, and he does talk about women, and it's glorious. And so that's what we're doing. But with that, I will thank my 2 co-hosts for trudging through the history of the anti-suffragette movement, which was mostly women, with me, and to our listeners for going over this dry subject with me, because history is kind of a dry subject, and I might get preachy on it, but I think we've revealed some important things that people have forgotten about the history of our culture. So thanks everybody for listening, and good night all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.